Okay, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're opening up quite a stack of sources, actually, all touching on something you've almost certainly encountered. Amber alerts and, well, other systems designed to grab our attention in an emergency.
Yeah, we've got a real mix here. Official stats from the Office of Justice Programs, some deep analysis from a research paper, discussions from a pretty active Reddit thread.
And news reports, too, sadly, covering a recent, very tragic case out of Washington state that brings this whole topic right into the headlines.
It really is a complex web of information, isn't it?
Yeah.
Covering a system that, impacts millions, yet how it really works and how effective it is, well, that's often misunderstood.
Absolutely. So our mission in this deep dive is to sift through all this material. We want to pull out the most important insights, maybe some surprising facts, and give you a really clear understanding of how these mass notification systems, especially Amber Alerts, actually function.
And what the data says about their impact, too,
Right.
plus the significant challenges they face out there in the real world.
Exactly. And look, we know this subject involving missing children is inherently sensitive. Our aim here, sticking strictly to the sources we have, is to focus on the system itself, its mechanics, its reported successes, its limitations, and, the real-world decisions involved in using it.
Makes sense. Focusing on the process.
So let's start right at the beginning then. What's the fundamental purpose? Why were Amber Alerts and similar systems even created according to these sources?
Well, at their core, these systems are all about getting critical information out to the public fast during emergencies.
Okay.
For Amber Alerts specifically, the goal is incredibly focused. It's about using the public, literally everyone's eyes and ears, to help find abducted children quickly and to help apprehend the suspects involved.
So getting that descriptive info out fast is absolutely key.
It is. The whole idea is built on, time being critical in these awful situations, and that the wider public can be a vital part of the search.
Right. And that fits into the broader picture, too, doesn't it, of mass notification systems aiming to inform us, get us to take protective action, whether it's like a hurricane warning or, in this specific case, an abduction.
Exactly. And if you look at the official numbers, the ones from the Office of Justice Programs, the system points to, pretty significant success on paper.
What do they say?
Their statistics, as of the end of 2024, report that 12,268 children were successfully recovered through the Amber Alert system, and 226 children were rescued because of wireless emergency alerts.
Wow. Okay. Those are powerful numbers. They suggest direct intervention, positive outcomes.
You certainly do. And it's important to remember the human story behind it all. The sources trace the origin back to that terrible case of 9-year-old Amber Haderman.
Right, in Texas, 1996. Abducted and murdered.
Yeah, and her case just sparked this nationwide movement, leading to these rapid notification plans, precisely because the traditional methods felt, inadequate in those super time-critical situations.
Okay, so we've got the purpose, the official success numbers, but here's where the sources introduce some real tension, right? A big point of debate.
Definitely. Is the picture as simple as those recovery numbers make it seem?
Exactly. When you start digging into some of the expert analysis and even public discussion like that Reddit thread, you find people questioning the direct causal link.
Right. Was it because of the alert that the child was found?
Yeah.
There's one participant in that Reddit discussion. They quote a researcher who looked really closely at over 1,500 cases and came to a frankly strikingly different conclusion, suggesting that, quote, "In my reading of the data, the number of children whose lives have been saved by Amber Alert ranges from 0 to something very close to 0.
0 or close to 0. That's a massive difference from over 1,200 recoveries cited officially. What's the reasoning there?
The argument, as it's laid out in the sources, is that in many cases where an Amber Alert went out and the child was recovered, they might have been found anyway.
How so?
Through just, ongoing routine police work, searching homes, interviewing people, following other leads. Information that wasn't necessarily generated by the alert itself.
And that's incredibly difficult to prove one way or the other, isn't it?
Almost impossible.
Like one Reddit user points out, you can't definitively say that one specific call triggered by the alert was the only reason the child was found.
Right. You can't run the experiment again without the alert.
Exactly, the counterfactual.
Right.
What would have happened if it hadn't gone out? Because, like they say, no one can say for sure whether one particular call-in tip was the definitive moment in recovery.
So the debate isn't really about if kids are recovered after alerts go out. It's about whether the alert itself was the essential, maybe even life-saving factor.
Okay, so that leads to something else that gets really interesting and often confusing for people watching the news. Why isn't an Amber Alert issued every single time a child is reported missing?
Yeah. You hear about these tragic cases, and the immediate question is, why no alert?
It comes down to the very specific, very strict criteria that have to be met.
Extremely strict.
Yeah.
The sources, especially things like the Washington State Plan and the Department of Justice guidelines, they are crystal clear on this.
Okay, what are they?
First, the child has to be under 18. Okay, that's straightforward.
Right.
Second, and this is crucial, they must be known to have been abducted. Not a runaway, not a situation where a child just wandered off or was maybe abandoned somewhere. It has to be an abduction.
Known abduction, got it.
Third, there must be a belief, based on the information available right then, that the child is in danger of imminent death or serious bodily injury. Imminent danger.
That sounds like a high bar.
It is. And you also need enough descriptive information about the child, the abductor, maybe a vehicle, to actually make an alert useful to the public.
Makes sense. You need something for people to look for.
Exactly. And finally, the case has to be reported to law enforcement and entered into NCIC. That's the National Crime Information Center database.
So, known abduction, imminent danger, enough info, and officially in the system. That's significantly narrower than just a child is missing.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another key point that comes up a lot in the sources, especially that Reddit discussion, non-stranger abductions.
Right. The ones involving family members.
Exactly. The sources point out that a really large percentage of cases that get called kidnappings aren't the stranger danger scenario we might first imagine.
What are they then?
Often they involve non-custodial parents or grandparents, other relatives, frequently tangled up in custody battles. Like one Reddit user put it, a lot of them seem to be kidnapping by a parent in a custody battle where there is no danger to the child.
Even though it's legally wrong and incredibly stressful.
Right. But they add that this type of situation is a major driver of child kidnapping statistics, even if the child isn't perceived to be in immediate physical harm.
And these domestic situations, however awful for the parent who's missing the child, they often don't meet that strict imminent danger of serious bodily injury or death threshold for an Amber Alert.
Correct. The system's focus for that specific tool is the imminent physical threat, not necessarily the legal violation or the emotional trauma, as terrible as those are.
And we see this play out tragically in that recent case from Washington State that the news reports covered.
Yeah, the timeline there is just heartbreaking, but it illustrates the criteria perfectly. 3 young sisters, picked up by their father, Travis Decker, supposed to be returned Friday evening, weren't. Reported missing around 9:45 p.m.
And law enforcement got involved right away. The reports and the probable cause documents say police actually requested an Amber Alert twice that night.
They did, but it wasn't issued.
Why not?
According to the Washington State Patrol, the WSP, and the court documents, at that time, based purely on the information they had, quote, there was no current evidence to believe the children were at risk of serious bodily injury or death. And critically, Travis Decker was a custodial parent. So under the Amber Alert rules, danger isn't automatically assumed just because a custodial parent is late returning kids. There wasn't, at that moment, enough information to meet the imminent danger part of the criteria.
So even with police asking for it, the situation, as understood at that specific point, reportedly didn't clear that very high bar required by the rule.
Right. Instead, what they did issue was an Endangered Missing Person Alert, an MPA, on Saturday.
Okay, what's the difference?
Well, the WSP stated the MPA accomplished much the same public notification outreach as an Amber Alert would have. It alerts other law enforcement, uses digital billboards, media alerts, things like that.
Right.
But the sources point out a key difference. MPAs don't typically have that automatic, loud, jarring push notification that goes straight to every cell phone in a geographic area. That's really a hallmark of the Amber Alert using the WEA system.
Wow. This case just really lays bare the incredibly tough decisions law enforcement have to make. In real time, under immense pressure, applying very specific established rules to these complex, fluid, human situations.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the criteria for when an alert goes out. The sources, especially that research paper by Jeremy Bernfeld, they dig into other big challenges, obstacles that can slow down or hinder the timely and effective use of these systems.
Right. Bernfeld's research looked at the management subsystem.
Yeah, basically the human part, where emergency managers get the threat info, analyze it, and then decide if and how to send an alert. It's not just flipping a switch. It's a decision-making process under stress.
And what did the paper find were the limitations there?
It points to issues with threat interpretation, organization, technology, and infrastructure limitations. So even if the tech works, accurately judging the threat level, coordinating between different agencies, making sure the infrastructure holds up under pressure, these are all major hurdles.
And the research emphasizes something else, too, that the people making these calls, the emergency managers, they aren't just thinking about getting the word out. They have to weigh the potential downsides.
What kind of downsides?
Well, the potential adverse impacts on the public, EMs, and emergency services that can follow an AWN, that's an alert, warning, or notification.
Oh, okay. Like what?
Like causing widespread panic, maybe interfering with first responders getting where they need to go, or completely overwhelming 911 lines. Thinking about those consequences can actually delay or even stop an alert from going out, even if it seems needed. It's a really tough calculation.
And this balancing act, weighing public reaction against the need to warn people, it's not exactly new, is it?
No, that Reddit thread brings up some history. Remember the milk carton kid campaigns in the 80s?
Vaguely, yeah. Pictures on milk cartons.
Right. Ran for years, huge visibility, but the sources say it had only one known success in actually finding a child. And it was eventually stopped, partly because doctors and others were complaining it was just scaring children unnecessarily.
So that tension between notifying the public and the potential negative fallout has been around for a while.
Which leads directly to another big challenge mentioned across the sources, alert fatigue.
Yes. The boy who cried wolf, basically.
Pretty much. It's a major concern. The idea that if we get too many alerts, or if the alerts seem, not that critical or repetitive, or maybe geographically irrelevant to us,
We start tuning them out.
exactly. We become desensitized, we ignore that distinctive sound, or just swipe the notification away without reading it. And that obviously erodes the system's effectiveness for when a truly urgent life-saving message does need to cut through.
And the systems themselves, they have built-in limitations that can sometimes contribute to this, or at least affect who gets the message when.
Like what?
Well, the Wireless Emergency Alert System, the WEA, that pushes Amber Alerts to phones. It often has specific operating rules. According to the sources, WEA alerts for Amber Alerts are typically only activated between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m.
Oh, interesting. So not overnight, usually.
Apparently not as a standard WEA push. And the Washington State Plan adds another really crucial limiter for WEA Amber Alerts specifically. They're issued only if license plate information is available.
Only if there's a license plate. So even if you have a known abduction, imminent danger, description of the car, but no plate number yet.
That automatic phone blast feature, the WEA part, might not get used based on that specific plan's rules.
Wow. Okay.
And the sources also mention how just the changing technology landscape affects things. There's a comment from a 911 dispatcher in the Reddit thread who notes that mass notifications felt much more useful during the landline era, back when phones were tied to specific addresses, compared to now with mobile phones and lots of opt-in services like Alert Me.
Right, if you have to actively sign up for alerts.
And the system's reach is limited from the start. As the dispatcher says, it's only as effective as the community itself actually taking that step to sign up.
And even other channels have limits, like those big electronic variable message signs, VMS signs on highways.
Yeah, the Washington Plan points out they need vehicle information to be really useful. And they can get bumped preempted if there's a more urgent motorist safety message needed, like for a major crash blocking the road.
And there was also mention that sometimes, historically at least, getting the full details for an alert required people to go to, like, a specific private company's platform, like Twitter was mentioned.
Yeah, which can obviously be a barrier if you don't use that platform or don't have easy access.
So, okay, we've talked about alerts maybe not being issued or being ignored, but the sources also explore the potential for alerts to actually have unintended negative consequences.
This is a really troubling aspect.
Yeah. One possibility raised is that the abductor could actually benefit from the information in the alert.
How?
Well, if they're monitoring the news or social media, the public alert could inadvertently tell them what the police know, what descriptions are out there, maybe where the search is focused. It could potentially help them evade capture longer.
Hadn't thought of that. And what about in those family abduction situations?
That's another concern raised. In those already volatile domestic disputes, an alert could potentially end up exacerbating what started as a stupid domestic dispute, turning it into a traumatizing manhunt when the kidnapping parent panics.
Right. Feeling cornered by this massive public alarm could push someone unstable into doing something much worse.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, there are the huge negative impacts of straight-up false alarms or even just alerts that cause mass confusion.
Like the Hawaii missile alert. That's the big one everyone remembers.
Right. The sources cite that as causing widespread panic. And crucially, it completely overwhelmed 911 and other emergency services, people calling frantically, tying up lines needed for actual emergencies.
And there are other examples too, right? Like Austin police getting flooded with calls about suspicious packages after bombings there.
Yep, tying up resources. And maybe less traumatically, but still problematic, people in Ontario apparently flooding 911 lines just to complain about being woken up by an Amber Alert.
Which, again, shows how public reaction, even if it's just annoyance, can strain systems that need to be available for genuine crises.
So, okay, let's try to wrap this all up. What does this deep dive into all these different sources tell us at the end of the day?
Well, we've definitely seen that official data credits Amber Alerts and related systems with a pretty significant number of child recoveries.
Yeah.
That highlights their potential power in certain really high-stakes situations.
You're sure?
But the sources also paint a much more complex, nuanced picture. It's a system built on very strict criteria, really designed for a specific, narrow type of case, the known abduction with imminent danger.
And it faces big hurdles in just getting activated quickly because of that human decision-making element, the pressure, the need to weigh those potential negative impacts we talked about.
Right. Add to that the limitations in the technology itself, the infrastructure, and that critical challenge of keeping the public engaged without causing alert fatigue.
That Washington case, the recent tragic one, where police reportedly asked for the alert, but it didn't meet the criteria at that moment. It just underscores how incredibly difficult and high stakes these real-time decisions are for law enforcement. They're operating strictly within established rules, even while a situation might be tragically unfolding.
Yeah. It's clear the Amber Alert system and these broader notification tools, they are powerful. They can be valuable in the right circumstances.
Yeah.
But they're definitely not perfect.
Not a silver bullet.
No. They operate in this really complex environment of human behavior, technology limits, and necessary but sometimes frustratingly limiting strict guidelines.
So it leaves us, and maybe you listening, with a really crucial question to think about, doesn't it? Given this ongoing debate about, how truly effective are these alerts in terms of directly causing recoveries, and acknowledging the real potential for negative impacts, panic, misuse of resources, alert fatigue.
How do we strike the right balance?
Exactly. How should we, as a society, best balance that undeniable need for rapid emergency notification in genuine crises with the equally important need to maintain public trust, avoid causing unnecessary fear, and, crucially, avoid desensitizing everyone to the warnings?
It's a really tough question in our constantly connected, always buzzing world.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that truly critical signals still cut through the noise?